This is video number 2 of a 3-part video series dealing with summary of quantities. And what we're going to talk about in this particular video is how to create your text for your quantity block and also your grid work. Now, the first thing that we need to do, we went through the standards tab in the previous video on how that all gets mapped over into MicroStation from what you have in the Excel file. But you also have this mo.template. Now what we're going to do is actually make a copy of that template, and basically what we'll have is separate tabs down below here for each quantity block that you will create for your project. So if you have a quantity for striping, you'd have one tab for that. Or if you got quantities for rock, maybe you'd have a separate one for that. So basically for each quantity block that you will have, you'd want to create a separate tab for each one of those. That way whenever you run that later on, it'll take all that information from that particular tab, and then you can place the quantity block in the location that you want in the MicroStation file. So the first thing that we're going to do is over this mo.template, we're going to right click over it and do a move or copy. We're going to create a copy, so we'll toggle that on, and we'll do the move to end, and then go ahead and click on OK. Then we need to go ahead and right click over it again, over the one that we just created, and we're going to go ahead and rename it to the quantity block that you're creating. Now for this one here, it's going to be type 1 rock blanket, and then just go ahead and hit enter to accept it. And like I said, if you have other ones that you're creating for like mobilization or striping or pavement quantities, you'd have separate ones for each one of those quantity blocks. So normally we leave the mo.template as is, that way we keep it as a template that we can make copies for each one of these quantity blocks that we're creating. So now if we go back to the type 1 rock blanket, now we can go ahead and start filling out this information for the quantity block. And I'll tell you some tips as we go through whenever we're creating the quantity block. So for our header up here, we're going to type in type 1 rock blanket. And we want to put it in B number 4. And the reasoning for that is later on, whenever we go through here and we have all of our text and all of our grid work, whenever it actually maps over into MicroStation, it'll automatically center this piece of text right here to whatever size your quantity block is. But you need to make sure that it's in B number 4. And of course, we're going to put it in all caps. Now this text right here by default is red. So if we go back to our standards tab, we'll notice that red text is going to map over with these attributes over into MicroStation, and basically it's large text. And that's what we want for our quantity block heading. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go down through here and fill out our columns for the information for this particular quantity block. So on this one here, I'm going to type in STA period for station. STA period for station there. Location. Furnished cubic yards. And I'll do a Control C and then I'll paste it here. This one here, I'll just change this one to place. And of course you just fill this information out according to the quantity block that you're creating. Now once I have that information filled out, you'll notice that by default these right here are green. Now if I start to fill out the rest of this information, it's all going to be in black. But you can change that piece of text to a green color if you want it medium text, or if it's black you can change that to black for small text. You can change it after the fact. Now I will go ahead and make these a little bit bigger, and you can just drag between your columns to make those bigger accordingly. Now later on, it doesn't matter what size this is right here, it's just going to look at what you have in these numbers right here, but we'll go over that a little bit later on. So you can kind of resize these accordingly to see all your information that you need. So now I will go through here and fill out the rest of this information down below here. And for this one here, I'll pause the video. So now you'll notice that I have the information filled out for this quantity block, at least for the text. So if I toggle off the grid, which is A number 3, you'll see that's going to look like this as of right now. Now, of course, where it says location, I have some text in here. I can make that a little bit bigger by dragging out that column, and you can see all that text. Now, a few things to note here. Number one is the justification does matter whenever it is in Excel. So whatever justification that you have in Excel, that's the way it's going to map over into MicroStation. So let's say I want my remarks, instead of that being center justified, maybe I want that left justified. So I can make a selection set by clicking on those cells, and I'm just holding my left mouse button down and selecting those cells. And then if I go up to my justification, which is this right here, I can do align left, and then they will all be aligned to the left side if that's what I want. If I want them center justified, I can leave them as is. So justification does matter. Another thing that you'll notice is right here I have that \203, which what that's going to do is if you want your special symbols like your baseline, your center line, plus and minus, certain special symbols that the Mo.3 font uses, and you want those to be incorporated into the MicroStation file, you can put those values inside here, and whenever it gets mapped over into MicroStation, it will have that center line symbol or baseline symbol or whichever value that you're putting in here. And for this \203, that is that center line symbol. So that's why those are in there. Another thing that you're going to notice is I am using formulas inside of here, which that's the main reason why we want you to use the Excel file, because it's a lot easier to add stuff up or set up formulas to make life a little bit easier on you. So for like this one here, you'll notice that it says F8 times 1.6, which that's what it's using right here, this 1.6 tons per cubic yard for estimation purposes. So I can take this value times 1.6 and I get that value. And it's the same thing for the rest of these. And then I did set up formulas for these here where it adds all these up. So formulas do work. Now make sure that you don't see this though, where you see these hashtags. If you see that, it will map it over just like what it's looking like right there over in the MicroStation with those hashtags. So make sure if you see that, make sure you just drag your column out a little bit bigger, and then you'll be fine to where you can see the values. You can also come in here and right click over a certain cell if you wanted to do the format cells. And for like this one here, it's set to 2 decimal places. Maybe I'll just set it to 1. And then I can use this number right here. So if I come back to format cells, and I know this for the use of it, it needs to be 0. I can set that to 0, and if this value was 2214.1, it would just round it to that nearest value, whatever that pay item is. Now for your totals, normally you want that to be a green piece of text, which is medium text. So what I can do is I can come in here and I can select those particular cells that have that text in it. And if I go up to my color right here for my font color, you have these top options up above here. And those are the ones that you'd want to use if you want to change the color to something else and still work with our color scheme underneath of our standards. So for like this one here, if I want this to be a green piece of text, I want to select this one right here. Don't use any of these other values down below here because it will not work. You have to use one of these theme colors right up here at the top. So if I want that to be a medium piece of text, I would change that to dark green. And then now whenever it gets mapped over into MicroStation, this text right here and this text right here will look exactly the same because like I said, all it looks at is the color of the text. Now if I do want these to be the same, this right here or this right here, I want it to be the same as this. What I can do is actually select one of these pieces of text and go to Format Painter. And then if I select this right here, it'll actually change those accordingly. So I could do it that way also. Just like what I did right there. Another thing that you want to pay attention to is your rows over here to the side. Normally for a large piece of text, this is going to be 0.4. If it's medium text, this is going to be 0.3. And if it's small text, this one right here needs to be 0.25. So since I know this is going to be medium text, I'm going to go ahead and bump that up to 0.3. That way I get a little bit more row height for that larger piece of text. Now another thing that you can look at is the station. Right now we have this station put in, and I just put in the number up here at the top. Now I could come in here and put a plus over to the side of it, which is fine if I want to do that. Or what I could do is, if for some reason I'm using these values right here to maybe set up a formula, I could set this as a whole number like what I have here for each one of these. And then if I format my cells, I can format to still show up as the stationing. And to do that, let me go ahead and right click over one of these and go to Format Cells. And if you go to the number tab and then go to Custom, you can go underneath here and swipe through that and put a customized one underneath there. So if I wanted 000 plus 00.0, and then I go ahead and click on OK to that, it'll actually show me that plus beside here, but on your actual cell here, it still sees it as a number if you wish to utilize that. So if I went through here and go to Format Cells, and I can do it to all of them if I wish to do that, and it should be down in my bottom of my custom options here. I can go and click on OK, and you can see that it goes through there and puts in that station, even though these are still whole numbers. If you wish to use that. If you don't want to, you don't have to. So now that we have our information filled out for our quantity block, now we can go through here and start putting in the grid work. So I'm going to make a selection set from B4 all the way down to H15. And then I will do a right click, Format Cells, Border. And I'm going to do a continuous border, so I will select one of my continuous lines. And then I want a border around the outside of it. So I could either use one of the presets, like what I'm doing here, or I could individually come through here and actually select what I want. I don't want any grid work in between there. I'm going to do that a little bit differently. So once I have that, go ahead and click on OK. And if I toggle off the grid, you'll start to see that it actually has a grid around it. Now I will do the same thing for B4 to H4. I'll make a selection set out of that. I'll right click over it, go to Format Cells, and then I'll do the same thing, and I want a line on the bottom of it. Go ahead and click on OK to that. Now I will make a selection set from B number 5 to H number 6. Now in this one here I will do the same thing. I will right click over it and do the Format Cells. This time I want a border on the bottom of it, which is still that thicker line weight, which is a continuous line style, and you'll see that whenever we go back to the Standards tab here in a second. But I also want a line that breaks out each one of my columns. I don't want a line going through the middle of it, which it would be this line right through here. I don't want that, so I would leave that blank, just the way it looks right there. So once I have that, go ahead and click on OK. And of course, if I toggle off the grid, you'll see that's going to look something like that. Now for the rest of it, I will go through here and go to B7 all the way down to H15. And on my inner grid work where I have my information for my quantity block, I want that to be a little bit different. So I will go ahead and right click over it again, go to Format Cells. But this time, instead of it being a continuous line style, I will use one of these other line styles. That way it maps it over with different attributes. So for this one here, I'll just use one of these dotted ones. I will select that. And then for this one here, I want this to all be inside. So I can click on it, like what I'm doing right here, or I can click on that inside option and it will fill that out accordingly. And once I have that, go ahead and click on OK. And if I toggle off the grid, you'll see that I have my grid work placed out there. Now maybe I want to break out my totals from my information from my quantity block, so I could come in here if I wanted to and make a selection set from B14 all the way to H14. And I could right click over it and do the Format Cells, and maybe just this one here I want that to be that thicker line weight. So I can click on a continuous line style. It doesn't matter which one it is, it just has to be one of the continuous line styles. And once I click on that, go ahead and click on OK. And now we've kind of broke that out. And if I go back to my Standards tab you're going to see that continuous line style is going to map over with these attributes. This color, style, and weight, which it's a number 5 weight. Anything else, it's going to be a smaller line weight, number 2. And for my inner grid work, I want that to be a smaller line weight. So once we have that, now we have our grid work set up. We have our text ready to go, we have our grid work ready to go, and so we're finished with this portion of this video. Now in the next video, we will talk about how to size your columns correctly, how to run it, how to bring it over to MicroStation, and then maybe do some edits with that, and so forth.